What's going on, everybody? It is a special podcast today because it's a Sunday podcast. All right, another Sunday podcast. Today is August 23rd, 2020. Yep, that's what it is right now. Anyway, welcome to the podcast. If you're a first-time listener, this podcast here is a multilingual podcast dedicated to teaching people the English language. So I have an account on Instagram where I post English expressions, and I also have a YouTube channel, Learn English with Mike. And then the Instagram account is learn.english.expressions. Anyway, so I post pretty frequently on Instagram, and then YouTube I use to upload podcasts and do lessons on different expressions and teaching English with the news. So today we're just going to kind of review some of the stuff that I posted on Instagram this last week. A lot of the stuff was in the stories with expressions in different songs, and then I had a few posts that I added. And so we'll go ahead and get started there. Let's look at the first expression that I shared. This one was to lose your temper. So when we talk about losing our temper in English, we talk about getting angry, right? You lose your temper. You lose your cool is another way we could say that. But basically it means that you get angry. So parents will often lose their tempers with their children when their children don't listen or don't do what they're told. That's kind of the idea, is you lose your temper. You're losing your cool. You're not controlling your anger. So we use this phrase a lot. Oh, he lost his temper. You don't want to see this person lose his temper, sort of thing. All right. And then another one that I shared was the phrase, let's call it good. I believe I shared this in a post. And this is just a very common phrase. Some of you could probably get it from the context, but basically the idea here is just like when you're going to finish something or you're not going to work on something anymore, you could say, let's call it good. It just simply means everything's good. This is good. Let's call it good. We say this like if you're working at your job and you're almost done with a project, you might say, all right, let's just call it good. Let's just be done. It's kind of like the phrase to call it a day. Let's go ahead and call it a day. But this is kind of like sometimes you would use this when something's not really 100% great, or it's not, the best work you've ever done, but you're just kind of, hey, let's just call it good. It's like, everything's good. It's okay, whatever. Let's move on with our lives, sort of thing. Let's call it good. But it doesn't always have to mean that. Like, you could do something that's great work and be like, I'm going to call it good now, and actually be referring to something that is good. So it's not always like that, but that's kind of a lot of times the meaning is like, let's just call it good. So we do use this phrase a lot. Another way we might use it is if you, let's say you borrow money from a friend and, it was $20, but you only have enough bills to make $15, and you're like, oh, here's $15. I'll give you $5 more to make $20 later, And your friend might say, you know what, let's just call it good. It's fine. $15 is fine. You just buy me a beer later and we'll call it good. It's like, everything's fine. It's all good, as we also like to say. And then another expression that I posted about was for someone to shoot you down. And this phrase, it can mean different things in different contexts, but the context that I heard it in and wanted to explain for you was like somebody getting shot down means somebody got rejected, right? So classic example might be if you try to ask somebody you like out on a date and that person rejects you, you could say, oh no, I tried to ask Samantha on a date and she shot me down. She rejected me, right? She rejected my proposition, basically. It got shot down, or she shot me down. Another way we could use this is talking about, like, if you're talking to your boss and you have a really good idea that you think is going to be great and you run it by your boss. In other words, you propose this idea to your boss to see what your boss thinks about it, and your boss says, oh no, that's not going to work here, or we don't have the money for that, or we can't do it for whatever reason, right? You could say, oh man, my boss totally shot me down. My idea was totally shot down. So that's what it means to get shot down. It's just kind of an expression, figurative, obviously. I always get kind of concerned about using expressions that have shoot or have these verbs that kind of have a more violent kind of meaning or sound to them, just because I don't want people to get the wrong idea, right? Because you could also literally shoot like something down, like a war or something. Maybe one country shoots another country's plane down, and that's what it literally means, right? But we use a lot of these phrases figuratively as well, and in this case, figuratively, it's when something gets rejected, it gets shot down. So moving on to the next one. This one's a pretty good one when you're talking about trying to pay back a friend or trying to do something nice for a friend. We say, I'll make it up to you. And it usually means that maybe you did something wrong or you have something disappointing to tell them, and you want to make things better, so you're going to do something nice to make it up to them. You say, I'll make it up to you. Let me make it up to you. I think I got this example from a song, but the idea basically is like if I miss my friend's concert, say I have a friend who plays music and I told him I would go to his concert and I miss it. I can't go for some reason, and he's really disappointed. I might say, hey man, I'm going to make it up to you. I'm going to buy you dinner. I'm going to take you out and, make it up to you somehow, or I'm going to send you a card. I'm going to do something nice to make it up to you. I'm trying to recompensate for the wrongdoing or for the mistake that I made, or for, basically disappointing this person. I'm making it up to them. I'm recompensating. I'm trying to right my wrongs, in other words. All right, and then another one. This one is a phrasal verb, and this one is one that I encountered, I think, in a song, and it's to pass out. And I think generally at the intermediate level, most people are familiar with this phrasal verb, but to pass out is when you become unconscious involuntarily, usually. So when you pass out, you're unconscious, you black out or whatever, and usually we talk about this when somebody goes to sleep and they are completely out, they're sleeping really hard. We could say, oh, this guy passed out over there, or he's passed out right now. But then we also talk about it when somebody's actually, like, for example, drinking too much and they pass out from drinking and they lose consciousness. Then we would say that person passed out. This person's passed out right now. He drank too much and now he just passed out. And you could talk about it too when you're fainting. If something happens, maybe you're sensitive to something, like somebody, a friend gets an injury and you see something gruesome and you faint. You could say, oh my gosh, I saw this and I passed out. It's like I fainted, basically. So basically losing consciousness is to pass out. So a nice little phrasal verb for you there. And then the next one that we're going to look at is this one was a song. I think this well, it's not a phrasal verb, but I don't know, it's kind of complicated to classify it because it has a phrasal verb in it, but it's also an adjective or a noun. In this case, so the word was, or the phrase was fallback crutch. I think it was an Everclear song. He says, I don't want to be your fallback crutch anymore. So this was a little bit complicated to explain, and I do encourage you to go onto Instagram and check under music for August to see some visuals for this explanation. But basically a crutch is when you injure your leg, the doctor gives you basically like what's a stick with cushions on it to go under your arm to help you walk. Those are called crutches, right? So when you injure your leg and you need those to help you walk, we call them crutches. You're on crutches is what we say. So we also use the term crutch to talk about kind of a figurative sense when you need help with something, right? So an example I gave was like when I'm trying to speak another language like Portuguese, my crutch is always to check on Google Translator, or I can't speak fluently without using Google Translator as my crutch, or any translator as my crutch. It's basically like the thing I lean on for support, or I depend on this for some support. So it's called my crutch. Now, the fallback crutch, it gets interesting here because a fallback, anything is like something you fall back on because something's not working out and you have to fall back on something that's more secure, basically. So we'll talk about this a lot when like you're trying to pick a profession in your life, and maybe you say, I want to be a musician. I want to be a famous musician, but I'm also going to study mechanics as a fallback plan. It's the plan you'll fall back on if the other plan doesn't work. It's like a plan B, basically. So we'll use that a lot too. I need something to fall back on. So I'm going to get this job if my business doesn't work, and I'll fall back on that job if this business doesn't work, or if my idea as a musician doesn't work, then I'll fall back on something else. So fallback crutch is like the crutch you fall back on. I believe in the song, it's the song Santa Monica by Everclear, and I think he's talking about he doesn't want to be the fallback crutch of a girl, like if you're in a relationship and the other person is trying to end the relationship and dating other people, but then when those other people break up with that person, the person falls back on you. You're the fallback crutch in that case. So I think that's the idea there. You're the person that is your significant other or your romantic interest is falling back on you. You're a fallback crutch. So I think that's the idea of what he's saying in the song. That's the way I understood it anyway. But anyway, when we talk about something to fall back on, we're talking about like a plan B or a sense of security. Like imagine a net you fall back into that saves you from hitting the ground. It's something to fall back into. So I wanted to highlight that one just because it was a phrasal verb, and I think the vocabulary crutch is probably not a word you encounter very often unless you're in the United States and have an injury that requires you to be on crutches. Then you might be introduced to this word, but I don't know if it's in any of the textbooks. And it's one that we use not a lot, but definitely you would encounter it, I would imagine. And it's got this colloquial meaning as well, so I thought it was good enough to share with everybody. But Anyway, we'll go ahead and move on to the next phrase. And I don't know how obvious this one is. Sometimes I hear phrases and I think, oh, this is a really good one to share. And then I get feedback from students and they're like, oh, that's really obvious, or it's almost the same in my language. But this one is to prove a point. So basically, this is to do or say something that demonstrates a point you are trying to make. So, for example, I think the example I used was, my sister was talking really loud on the phone, so I turned the TV up to prove a point, to kind of point out that I can't hear the TV while she's talking on the phone. So I'm proving a point. I'm trying to demonstrate my point through my actions. But yeah, we say this phrase a lot, and it's one that I like because in English anyway, it has that nice alliteration, prove a point. So it has a nice sound to it. So people will say it really fast, like, I just did it to prove a point, or I'm trying to prove a point. You could also say make a point, but prove a point sounds nice. And I don't know if everybody would be able to pick up on that if they heard it real fast. It's almost sounding like one word, to prove a point. I did it to prove a point. So it's a good one to be familiar with. And it's like you're providing evidence to make your point very clear. So that's what it means to prove a point. This next one is really good. I've heard it on the news a couple times, and it's just kind of a fun expression. It's a hard one to explain, and I gave some examples with the website Youglish, and I shared those on Instagram. If you don't know that website, Youglish, it's a great site. It's like basically YouTube, but you can look up any phrases in English, or there's multiple languages available, but you can just type those in, and it'll show you several videos that have people saying those phrases. I think they use the subtitles to search for them. So you get, 10 to 20 to maybe even hundreds of examples of people using this phrase. So when you don't quite know a phrase, or you've read the definition and you still aren't quite getting it, it is a great way to, really, really get an understanding of the phrase. You just type it in Youglish, and you can see several videos where people use that phrase and get good examples of it. But anyway, I got kind of sidetracked there, but the phrase is to be out of the woods. And the idea is we'll use it when we're talking about being safe, right? So a lot of times we'll say, we're not out of the woods yet. And that was the examples in Youglish. They were talking about, I think there was an example with Barack Obama actually giving a speech about the economy getting better, but I think he said, we're not out of the woods yet. It means we're not in a comfortable, safe, zone or status where we can kind of breathe and relax. We still need to be cautious or need to make good decisions, because if we make the slightest error, things could go really bad. So I think the idea of this whole expression is that the woods can be a dangerous place. There could be wild animals, there could be wolves, whatever. You could get lost in the woods. So when you're out of the woods, you're safe, right? So we'll say we're not out of the woods yet. It means we're not quite safe yet, right? So for example, I don't know, if I'm taking a trip and the car that I'm driving is almost out of gas, and I'm only a few miles from the gas station, but it looks like the car might die. I could say, well, I see a sign that says gas station 2 miles. I might say, oh, thank goodness, but we're not out of the woods yet, because I don't even know if this car will make it 2 miles. So that's an example of how you could use that phrase, to be out of the woods. And then another one could be, for example, if you're trying to pay off debt and you you manage to pay one credit card, but you still have another credit card. You could say, well, I got that credit card paid off, but I'm not out of the woods yet because I still have this credit card, or I still am making a payment on my car. So I'm not out of the woods yet. I'm not clear of danger yet. So that is how that phrase works. It's a pretty fun one, I think. And I've been hearing it a lot lately. That's why I took note of it. Next one was to bottle something up. So this was a phrasal verb, right? To bottle something up. And the idea here is it could be literal. You could actually put something in a bottle and use this phrasal verb to describe that action and say, I'm bottling this up, right? When you're putting something in a bottle, you say, I'm bottling it up. But we use it a lot to talk about your emotions, right? To have bottled up emotions. It's like emotions that you're hiding or that you're containing. And they're being bottled up. They're being contained in a bottle, figuratively, right? So we use that phrase a lot, like, I have something bottled up, or you can't bottle things up like that, you can't bottle your feelings up. You have to tell people how you feel, otherwise it makes you upset. So that's the idea of bottling something up. And then I will finish on this last one, which was from a radio show that I share on Instagram sometimes called Second Date Update. And it goes with the highlight that I made for dating English, just where I'm trying to teach some different phrases that we use when we're in the context of dating or talking about the context of dating. And I use this radio show because it's called Brooke and Jeffrey in the Morning. And they do this segment called Second Date Update. And it just gives a great example of conversational English. And they use some great phrases while they're talking. And so when I hear those, I feel obliged to share them with you. So this one was pretty funny. He was talking about his friends doing this murder mystery party. And he was saying, we get it catered. And we rent this big old house. And, it's the first time I really analyzed this phrase. But when somebody says something like that, like this big old house, or we'll say too, like, oh, that's a big old glass, or, oh my gosh, that's a big old spider right there, is almost like a big old spider. Or, geez, that's a big old truck over there. We just add the word old almost as a superlative or a way to exaggerate how big it is. It doesn't actually mean that something is old, like in the case that I used before of the big old house. The house isn't actually old. It's just a very big house. So I don't know if it's kind of an old Western way of talking or Southern way of talking or twangy or whatever, but people say, oh, that's a big old I don't know, that's a big old lake, or that's a big old mountain, or in this case, that's a big old house. And basically, yeah, that's what it means, is the house is extremely big, and it's pretty hard to explain why. I mean, there's no real logic towards it. I guess you could think of it as like, it's so big that it must be old as well, or it's so big that it must have been around forever because it's that big. It will stand forever. I don't know. So anyway, it's just something we use when we're speaking sometimes. And I don't know, I think it's kind of fun. It was a funny one to try to explain because I never really considered, I've never thought twice when I hear somebody say that or if I say it. But then I heard it in the context of trying to teach, and I was like, wait a second, this is funny that we do that. We do say a big old something, and it's more of a superlative. It's more of a way to exaggerate than to actually qualify whatever the noun is as being old, right? We'll say, oh, that's a big old bug. That's a big old mosquito. That's a big old bee, etc., etc., etc. All right. Well, that is it for today's podcast. Again, I hope you enjoyed feel free to send me a message on Instagram, write me a comment on YouTube, or send me a voice message if you're listening on Anchor FM. And let me know if you have any questions, if there's something you want me to explain or something you would like to hear me talk about in a podcast, and I will be happy to do that. Until then, I hope you all have a wonderful week and keep studying and keep learning, and we will see you next time. Take care.